I'm just going to spend a few minutes telling you how it came to be that I was at this place, because there are a most extraordinary series of coincidences. In 1979, physicians who were members of CND decided that it would be useful to start a medical anti-nuclear group, or the medical campaign against nuclear weapons, in which I was involved in from the early days. And at the same time, an extraordinary meeting occurred in Vienna between a very prominent Soviet cardiologist called Eugenie Chasov and a very prominent American cardiologist called Bernard Lahn. Some of you who have been involved in resuscitation will know that Bernard Lahn was the first person to promote external cardiac massage and was a very prominent cardiologist. He was a Lithuanian Jew, and he had been striving for peace for many years, and he met Chasov in a hotel in Vienna at a conference, and they said, this nuclear stuff is lunacy, our countries have 60,000 weapons between us, the whole thing is crazy, let's start an anti-nuclear medical movement. And we in the UK always first started ours a bit before they started, but we became the UK affiliate of the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, which I became involved with. And we had a number of congresses. In 1985, the organisation actually won the Nobel, if that's the right word, was given the Nobel Peace Prize for our work in bringing the Soviets and America together. And it was an extraordinary coincidence that Chasov turned out to be Gorbachev's private physician. And so in the middle 80s, the international physicians became more prominent because we had access to Gorbachev. And we went and had this 7th Congress in Moscow in May 1987. I turned up. At that stage, I wasn't on the board or anything of this organization, although latterly I have been. And the reason I mention that is that peace conferences, as those of you who've been to them, are by no means peaceful. There is plenty of dispute and aggro and this, that, and the next thing. And this evening, that day, the 28th of May, had been particularly aggravating. I can't remember why. Anyway, I was pissed off, and Russia Hotel, as you saw in that film, is not the most comfortable place to stay. It's a monument to gross and grotesque Stalin architecture, and it is, every floor is personed by a 15-stone who would do excellently in the English front row, usually female, but very, very brisk in sorting out people who go in and out. And as I say, when you're feeling aggravated, you don't want to be there. And so I went out into Red Square with my camera to do the bit of amateur filming, which I'm sure most of you will recognize as an expert and worse. But I was doing this, and then suddenly this noise appeared. And as you will recognize from the film, the young lad at Lenin's tomb heard the plane coming over the first time. And you could hear it in the film, I don't know if you did. I didn't actually take the first pass, but the second pass I did take. And that was when all this thing unraveled. And you see the rest of the stuff there. So I'll just briefly describe what happened afterwards, because that in itself is an epic. It so happened that on the 28th of May, the council of IPW had been having conversations with Gorbachev, and there had been some fruitful dialogue, I was told, by the people. And one of the disputatious things was that somebody said there was a lot of hassle about whether one should or shouldn't be talking to Gorbachev in a preferential way. I can't remember the details. Anyway. So Gorbachev had been closely involved with the IPNW peace on that particular day. And so at 6 o'clock on the morning of May the 29th, you can imagine my discomfiture when there was a knocking on my door in the Russia Hotel. Because although relations with Gorbachev were cozy, I had no doubt that relations with the KGB would be less cozy. And these, of course, were the people I thought were knocking on my door. But no, it wasn't. It was, of course, America and the NBC. And they were coming to get the film. And they had been told, in a slightly unfriendly fashion, that a geriatric bored English doctor had taken a film of this thing. And there were two of us at that stage, a colleague from Cardiff, and he was the one who was fingered first, I'm glad to say. but it wasn't him, and he said, oh no, there's a lookalike down the corridor there. And so they came to my room and said, could they please have the film? And I said no. And the reason I said no was not because of anything else apart from the fact that I thought it would discomfort greatly the Russians, the Soviets, with whom you were in important dialogue. And so I said I wouldn't, under any circumstances, said to them, and there was a bit of toing and froing, and he said, well, it'll be out soon anyway, and then of course, somebody else would have filmed it, and you'll miss your chance, kind of thing, the usual stuff that goes on. Andy Gilmore, the gentleman's name, was a pretty persuasive NBC journalist, but I stuck to my gun and said no. And I went to the ADNW group and said, what about this? I've got this film, it shows an extraordinary event. This guy says, it seems that he's here on a peace mission, although it wasn't clear that came from the film, and there was some issue about that at the time. What should we do with it? Do I give it back to the Soviets? Do I give it to the KGB? Do I give it to who? Or what? And we just stuck with it. And that was on the 28th and 29th of May came, and then on the 30th of May, the Minister of Defense in the Soviet hierarchy has total control over all the Soviet armed forces. And the person who was at that time in command was Sergei Sokolov, who was 75 years old and was a bastion of the old Soviet order. And he was somebody that Gorbachev had been desperate to get rid of. And on the 30th of May he was sacked. And the reason for his sacking was because this plane had come across. And it was clearly he was a defective defender of the Soviet airspace. Along with him was sacked Marshal, I've got his name, Kudanov, who was the air marshal in charge of the Air Force, and apparently 2,000 other Soviet Air Force people, all of whom had been on a 5-hour path from the border to Moscow. All of them in that little place. And they were all just somewhere in this place. And Gorbachev said this plane had landed in Red Square, and so it was all out in the open. And so NBC came back to me and said, what about it? And I said, well, okay, it's fine now. Naive as I was, I said, you better give me decent money because I'll give the money to the peace movement. That was a grave mistake. Anyway, I negotiated, or didn't negotiate, because I'm completely clueless about these things, as colleagues in the audience will know. The sum I got at the end was $3,000. US dollars for this work of art, and the shaking of the heads shows it all. Anyway, I gave this thing away, and it's only today that I read the contract. And in this contract, they have actually made a significant error. They say that he landed on May the 29th, when in fact he landed on May the 28th. So I could probably have broken this contract had I read it carefully right from the start. Anyway. I did, and I got back to the UK and I went on to the day programme, and I said that I was peace in the day programme, and then the kind of response that some of you guys have given, which is, hey, what the hell have you been doing, sending this to writing some money came. So I went to the NBC bureau chief in London, and I said, look, I am naive, I am a doctor, and I know I have no rights at all because I was given away this thing, but actually I think I've been done. And shouldn't you actually give me a bit more money? In the end they did. They gave me another $5,000, so I got $8,000 for it and all. I did give most of it, $6,000 to the peace movement, and kept $2,000 myself. And so that was the kind of epic of that particular thing. And then I decided that I'd write to Matthias Rust in a rather priggish and prim way. And I thought, well, I've given my money to the peace movement, shouldn't he as well? And so when he came out of prison, I wrote to him. I wrote a letter to him saying, I can't remember what I said, but I said, dear Matthias Rust, I recognise that now you live on the peace movement and we're all in this together, and nuclear war, etc., etc., etc. Don't you think you should give your money to the peace movement? I didn't hear anything, but Derek and Anna told me that when they met him in Berlin, he said he had received the letter, but for some reason felt unable to answer it.